Statistically, I shouldn't be here. Less than 2% of displaced youth earns a degree. I was 87 to 346 times more likely to leave high school early, according to the national estimates on youth homelessness. And I score 100% in adverse childhood experiences. And that isn't a test you want to ace. Statistically, I should be rot in addiction. I should be imprisoned. I should be complacent in dysfunction. But I'm not. I'm standing right here. Not just as a survivor of every form of abuse and neglect, but as a storyteller, as someone who was nearly expelled, to someone who became an advocate for students facing expulsion, as someone who was chronically absent, but still graduated with honors, as someone who filed for emancipation at 16, as someone who raised my younger brother and myself, and as someone who understands addiction and crime, not as criminal, but as coping mechanisms to trauma and a lack of resources. I should not statistically hold 2 master's degrees and be close to completing a doctorate. But here I am, standing in resilience. And I come with a message that should shock no one listening tonight, that I am far from alone. By the age of 16, 3 out of every 4 students have experienced or been exposed to a traumatic event. The impact of trauma affects several domains of functioning related to school performance. Behaviorally, exposure to trauma and chronic stress has been associated with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, separation anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and oppositional behavior. Academically, trauma exposure predicts poor reading, math, and science achievement scores. Adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, are serious childhood traumas that manifest as toxic stress, which damage the developing brain of a child and affect overall health. Adverse childhood experiences range from witnessing domestic violence to being verbally abused, to experiencing violence in our neighborhood. And this exposure to trauma alters our brains, which in turn alters our reactions. I know it seems like a really elaborate excuse a defiant child might concoct, but as someone versed in writing the school code of conduct so many times that I began to memorize it, I can tell you from experience that when I acted out in school, it was because I was suffering at home. School was my sanctuary. It was the only place that I felt safe. Research states that childhood trauma has been labeled as America's hidden health crisis. And the CDC warns that trauma is one of the largest public health issues facing our children today. I research and create trauma-informed curriculum and interventions because systems continue to oppress. As an educator, it's easier to sometimes send a reactive student out of class. I've been there many times. Sometimes we've tried everything. Sometimes we've not given them enough chances. Sometimes we're just exhausted. And sometimes we just really wanted to finish the lesson that we started. But I promise you, on most days, if you kneel near that child and ask, what happened this morning? They will reflect or share with you a difficulty that you may not have been aware of, and a part of a plot that was once withheld will often be revealed. In 2019, the CDC reported that at least 1 in 7 children had experienced child abuse and/or neglect in that year. Since the pandemic, that number has increased exponentially because of isolation and the lack of mandated reporting. I started an educational consultancy called Writing Resilience, where I innovate customized trauma-informed intervention systems with the goal of increasing academic performance and student engagement while decreasing the rate of referrals, detentions, suspensions, and expulsions. If you're interested in knowing more, you'll have to catch my next TED Talk. But my call to action for you today is for you to research and open your mind to trauma-informed care, trauma-informed intervention, and trauma-informed curriculum. If you're a principal or superintendent, invest in it. If you're a teacher or dean, educate yourself to the reactions that emerge from students who are suffering. They don't necessarily want to anger you or disrespect you or hurt you, but they are hurting. And if they have post-traumatic stress disorder, their developing brain cannot access self-control and emotional regulation in the way many of us can. The National Survey for Children's Health reveals that close to 35 million children have grown up suffering violence, neglect, and other forms of trauma. When I arrived late, or spoke back, or avoided assignments, I was coping with the daily rage I experienced having witnessed my mother's death and having been so openly abused and neglected by my father. I live with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and severe generalized anxiety disorder without promise of relief. But it brings me hope to see that many schools are employing methods like social emotional learning and restorative justice in place of traditional consequences. I am heartened to read a multitude of articles that elevate the benefits of ensuring all classrooms are trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive, and that the pillars of connection, safety, relationship building, and resilience are being employed. I am a product of my environment, but I was extended opportunity through teachers who believed in me, the ones who asked why I skipped school without writing me up, the deans who let me miss detention so that I could catch the bus to one of my 2 part-time jobs because they knew I depended on that income, the ones who tutored me at their kitchen tables to help me make up the year of math I missed, the year my mother died. We have to expect power struggles from youth who have been rendered powerless. It is our job as educators and deans and administrators to stop asking, what is wrong with you? But to truly hold space when we ask, what happened to you? The urgency is evident, and despite the fact that schools are the largest mental health provider for children, most struggle to implement consistent strategies to support youth who've experienced trauma. Statistically, they shouldn't be here, but they're walking into our classrooms with backpacks full of rage and shame, and they will be wrought in addiction, and they will be imprisoned, and they will be lost in cyclic dysfunction if we don't do something, if we don't listen, if we don't open our minds to methods outside of traditional discipline structures, if we don't acknowledge the depth of this crisis. Thank you.